Good evening and welcome. I am Leila Logiziko. I'm the president of the City Club, and tonight's City Club of New York webinar is titled The Faith-Based Affordable Housing Act, Win-Win or Dangerous Deregulation. At the intersection of urgent housing need and land use reform, New York State Senator Andrew Gunaronis and Assemblymember Brian Cunningham have introduced legislation that could reshape how faith-based organizations develop their land. The bill offers zoning exemptions and increased density allowance for religious institutions seeking to build affordable housing on their property, a proposal that has garnered both praise and concern. Proponents of the bill see it as a long overdue opportunity to actively utilize land for the public good. Critics warn that it could set a precedent for sidestepping local planning processes, weakening environmental review, and opening the door to broader deregulation under the banner of affordability. So tonight, we ask, is this a bold and necessary step towards housing justice? Or does it invite unintended consequences under the guise of good intentions? We've convened a panel of experts, housing advocates, planners to unpack the stakes, examine the legislative text, and explore what it means for communities, congregations, and the future of zoning in New York, and the future of housing as well. We are really pleased to be joined by a wonderful panel. Introducing Andrew Berman, who is the Executive Director of Village Preservation, a leading voice for historic preservation and community-based planning in New York City, with a focus on the West Village as well as downtown. Xiomara Pedraza serves as the Chief Real Estate Development Officer for the Sisters of Charity Housing Development Corporation. She is also a former Assistant Commissioner at the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, and brings a practitioner's eye to the realities of building affordable housing, from navigating regulations to aligning mission with financing. George Janes is the principal of George Janes and Associates, an urban planning consultancy firm known for its rigorous analysis of zoning proposals and environmental review. George has advised community boards and advocacy groups across the city and the state, and will help us understand how this legislation fits or conflicts with existing land use framework. And Jay DiLorenzo is the president of the Preservation League of New York State, where he leads the statewide efforts to protect historic resources through policy, advocacy, and education. Jay brings a statewide preservation perspective and will speak to the potential impact this bill could have on historic sites across New York. So I want to give a brief overview about the bill, what the bill does, what the bill does not do. So as I said in my preamble, the bill was introduced by State Senator Andrew Gunaronis and Assembly Member Brian Cunningham. And I am going to share my screen to share with you a couple of slides. Okay, so it is introduced in this legislative session, 2025-2026. And the bill would enact the Faith-Based Affordable Housing Act. As I said, it's sponsored in the Senate by Andrew Gunaronis. So the summary of the provisions mentions that so Section 2 adds a new section to the general municipal law, which stipulates that places of worship such as temples, churches, mosques, and synagogues are allowed to bypass local zoning laws that restrict their ability to develop their land so long as they meet the following requirement. The organization must be building mixed income or 100% affordable housing, which can be either rental or co-op units. Inside New York City, the building must conform with the city's mandatory inclusionary housing, MIH, affordability standards. And there are three different options: 25% of units set aside with a median for households earning an area median income AMI of 60%. Option 2, 30% of the units set at 80% of the AMI, or 20% of the units set aside as 40% of the AMI. So what does this bill, this act, if it were to be passed, would allow religious organizations to do? It would allow them to bypass local zoning laws for qualifying housing development. It would allow them to build up to 10 to 20 feet above the existing height limits. It would use nearby zoning within 800 feet to claim higher density, and that would apply only to New York City. To give you an example, 800 feet is the distance between St. Patrick's Cathedral and Rockefeller Center. It would allow the religious organizations to partner with private developers via sale or long-term ground lease. It would permit the development of 100% affordable or mixed income housing. So as we saw previously, up to 80% of the housing could actually be market rate. It would receive fast-tracked ministerial permit approval from municipalities that could not exceed 60 days. It would avoid SECRA, which is the State Environmental Review Framework, as well as SEEKR, which is the specific environmental review framework for New York City, and would entirely eliminate environmental certifications. It would distribute affordable housing units evenly and with equal finish. It would retain affordability restrictions on resale of co-op units. And it would receive the owners of the land would receive training and technical assistance on developments. So what does this act mean for the localities? What localities can't do if this bill would pass, and what they would be prohibited from doing that they currently can do? They could not impose any parking requirements. They could not set minimum, maximum, or average unit size. They would have to require priority. They could not require priority for local residents or age-based preference. They could not enforce local building or fire codes beyond what the bill coins as the standard state code. They could not require more affordability than outlined in the bill. They could not demand utility or municipal service upgrades as a condition. They could not charge more than 25 cents per square foot in permitting fees. And they could not conduct any discretionary permit reviews or hearings, and they could not apply SECRA for any type of certification. So this is a big change compared to what currently municipalities do, as municipalities are actually responsible for zoning and land use. It is their prerogative. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to actually turn the conversation to the experts. Starting with you, George, you're an urban planner, and we are very excited to hear your take on what this bill would or would not do in terms of the zoning and land use in New York City.
Great. Thank you. I am going to share my screen as well. And hopefully people can see this.
Yes,
Okay.
we can see your screen.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to start by just reading a section of it, a section of the bill. Okay, this comes straight from the bill. If the development site is located within 800 feet of a zoning district that permits a height or density for residential use greater than what is otherwise provided for in this paragraph, then the city shall allow residential buildings on the development site up to the maximum height and permitted height and density permitted in such a zoning district. And when I read this, I was very surprised because this is a very big deal. And I will explore what these words mean on an actual development site. But first, before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about New York City and how it's developed over the years, right? So this is on the Upper East Side. It's showing a kind of typical New York City building form where you have big towers along the wide avenues. This is Second Avenue on the right side, First Avenue on the left side, and then in the mid blocks on the narrow streets, you have lower density tenements for the most part. The bigger buildings you see terminating this view, that's the wide crosstown street, 86th Street. On 86th Street, you also have bigger buildings because you have because you have a wide street. And that's no accident, right? You know, the 1916 resolution, zoning resolution, used street width to determine what height buildings have to set back. A current resolution is more specific, but it still uses the pattern of wide streets get higher density. Lower density is found on the narrow streets. It is the New York City pattern. And so this would break that, right? Because 800 feet there are no avenues that are 800 feet apart, right? It would essentially take the avenue zoning on either side and allow it to go into all of the mid block. And so what would happen, this is a real site, St. Stephen of Hungary. It's a school on the south side of East 86th Street between First and York Avenue. The church that was in this building closed in 2015, but it's still a very active parochial school. St. Stephen is made up of two buildings and a vacant lot. The vacant lot is used for parking and a play yard. But if you live on the Upper East Side, you probably did your farmer market shopping here because that's where the Upper East Side farmer market is located on Saturdays. So under current zoning, this site could be redeveloped something like this, where it has the R8B mid-block zoning, so it has a 75-foot height limit. And so it could be developed something like this with affordable housing. We just passed City of Yes, and with universal affordability preference, 20% affordable housing in the building. It could be something like this. But with faith-based affordable housing, taking the avenue zoning and bringing it into the mid-block, you could do something like this, where you could have two separate buildings where you would have your separate affordable building. In this case, we were figuring it'd be about 160 feet. And you could have like an unlimited height tower that could be in the mid block. You run out of floor area at about 700 feet. We expanded the school or the community facility use into the base. This is the way it works here is that the tower on base rules don't apply in the mid block, so they wouldn't apply on this site. So the tower rules would be the standard tower rules, which would essentially not have the bulk packing and other provisions that are provided on the avenues. And so it could be much taller and larger than the avenue buildings. So, you know, I think, and that's not all, is that faith-based affordable housing, as Layla said, it exempts from environmental review. It says no environmental impact statement for a residential building shall be required if it conforms to the provisions of the section. And there are lots of issues with this, but you know, I think the most important thing to say is that just because a development is exempted from environmental review doesn't mean there won't be environmental impacts. It just means that they're not going to be disclosed or planned for. This is especially important when it comes to things like sewage treatment and the pipes underneath the streets, sewer mains. Sewer mains are sized according to zoning. And if we're just moving zoning districts around without any environmental review, that means that we might not have the infrastructure to service those, and we won't know about it until after the buildings are permitted and being constructed. So in sum, in my view, Faith-Based Affordable Housing Act is hostile to home rule, local planning, and local land use control. And, to me, the timing is really strange. New York City has passed major changes to zoning to encourage more affordable housing. And it also has these big, major efforts in the work. So we just did City of Yes. We're going to have the Manhattan Plan. We're going to have City of Yes for families. And there's all these other efforts that are happening right now. So local efforts are working. And so I'm wondering why this is happening now. And then finally, this is just policy issue is why should state policy be benefiting one class of affordable housing developers over all other classes of affordable housing developers? That's a question, but I don't understand why that would be good policy. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you so much, George. Thank you for demonstrating, as we say, an image is worth 1,000 words, and this one is quite a punch. Thank you. The next speaker on this issue is Xiomara Pedraza. Xiomara, I think that you do not have any slides, but we're looking forward to your presentation and comments.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me. As Layla mentioned, I'm here to provide my perspective as a nonprofit housing developer. I also used to work at HPD, so I, understand that perspective as well. And I work for an organization that was started by an order of nuns, and is now an independent 501(c)(3). So because of those origins and that history, we do end up working with other faith-based organizations quite often to look at if we can develop their land and preserve affordable housing in New York City and also in the Hudson Valley. So I think it's no secret that across New York State, we're facing a shortage of affordable, stable, and quality homes in nearly every community, right? Whether you're upstate or downstate, I think the story ends up being the same. There's too many people who are struggling to really find a home they can afford. The challenges we face as developers in addressing this shortage are rising construction costs, limited government subsidies, and land use policies that haven't really kept pace, particularly in the suburbs, with the need. In response to these challenges, I think we need creative, common sense solutions, and I see this act as that solution. So how does this bill help FBOs? The act removes barriers that have stood in the way of development on land owned by faith-based institutions. These organizations are often sitting on underutilized land or buildings due to declining congregations. So these are empty schools, rectories, convents, parking lots that could be adaptively reused for housing. But right now, the process to do so is filled with red tape, sometimes unnecessary zoning restrictions, and long, expensive legal battles that a lot of organizations can't afford to take on. This is particularly true in the Hudson Valley, where many towns, villages, and hamlets regularly oppose affordable housing development. According to a recent report by the Furman Center, in a random sample of FBO-owned parcels in urban areas outside of New York City, 60% were subject to zoning that prohibits multifamily housing, while 30% permitted only single-family development. This bill doesn't guarantee development everywhere, but it does help facilitate as-of-right development, making it possible to build mixed-income housing without the need for discretionary approvals or subsidies. And that's important because in today's market, the cost of construction outpaces availability of government subsidies. There's simply not enough LIHTC, state and city funds to sufficiently meet the demand. So we do need solutions that don't rely solely on public funding. And for those of you who don't know, mixed income development enables market rate units to cross-subsidize affordable units so that government funding can be focused where it's needed most, like housing for extremely low-income households or more vulnerable populations. I think we also have to acknowledge the broader implications where many communities across the state have been resistant to multifamily development and affordable housing, and that opposition, whether it's rooted in prejudice, fear, or misinformation, has made it incredibly difficult to serve low-income households in areas with the most opportunity. This has real fair housing consequences. I don't think we can continue to concentrate affordable housing units in communities that already have their fair share, while others get to block it outright. Families with modest incomes deserve to have options. They deserve to be able to live in homes that are close to work, near good schools, with access to public transportation, and the kinds of neighborhood amenities that support long-term well-being and economic mobility. I think that that's what excites me most about this legislation, that it supports a more equitable sort of distribution of affordable housing, because faith-based institutions are embedded in every community, from wealthy suburbs to urban cores. It opens the door to create housing in places that's desperately needed, yet rarely built. I think a lot of folks might be, fearful of overdevelopment, but not every faith-based site will be suitable for housing. Some are too small or complex, and some FBOs won't want to develop at all. Currently, where existing zoning technically does allow housing, many faith-based organizations find that the cost of compliance, things like excessive parking minimums or outdated unit caps, make their project infeasible. And I think this bill really helps reduce those obstacles. And if I can speak to a couple examples now, I think that would be helpful to sort of paint the picture. So in Yonkers, we were working on a project that was a convent that is no longer in use. It's sitting empty. And we were looking at how many units we could potentially develop there and convert it to. With the current zoning, we figured we can do 40 units and use state senior housing term sheet dollars to create affordable housing. However, there was a significant financial gap. With this bill, the units can be up to about 50. And that would significantly reduce our financing gap to making that potential project a possibility. There's another old Catholic school in Westchester where we had originally planned to acquire the site and build 60 units for low-income families. But we had to seek a variance for that lower parking requirement. Through the conversations with the existing parish and the local planning board, it became clear that a parking variance was not going to be likely. It was going to be successful. And so we reduced the size of the building to 42 units. We also had to do a public school enrollment study. And just a fun fact, in the Hudson Valley, school enrollment has been actually going down over time, but it's still a mandated study for different towns. The parish ultimately decided to place the property on the market and sell to the highest bidder because they wanted to avoid any political backlash. Had this bill passed, we could have moved forward with a 62-unit affordable housing project as planned without having to seek that variance to the zoning. We also have 2 sites in Manhattan that we're looking to convert convent SRO-style buildings into studios and 1-bedrooms for permanently supportive housing in Midtown area, which is a neighborhood with lots of amenities. But because these buildings are already located in more high-density districts, and City of Yes has already passed, as George kind of explained, they're also within districts, landmark districts, so we have to retain facade. The build is not going to have much of an impact on these particular sites. So those are just examples of 3 different sort of projects and how this bill could help or not help them.
Great, thank you so much. Turning the floor now to Andrew Berman. Andrew.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes, we do.
Great. So Village Preservation has been involved in pushing back on the Faith-Based Affordable Housing Act since it has been introduced. I would roughly describe this as a case where, without a doubt, there are individual situations where one might say existing zoning regulations perhaps there's a more optimal outcome that could be desired at a particular location. But the bill itself, as written, is a throw the baby out with the bathwater sort of approach. It reminds me a little bit of what DOGE was doing with government efficiency. I think we would all agree that there are ways we can make government more efficient. I'm not sure that slashing all structures is really the way to do it. And the Faith-Based Affordable Housing Act is focused on more or less preempting a huge array of existing local zoning as well as landmark regulations to enable a very, very, very broad array of developments to take place, many of which would have questionable public benefits. As you can see here, we've helped generate over 220,000 letters to state legislators raising these kinds of concerns about the bill. And I've been asked to talk specifically about the impact on landmark properties, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the issue of affordability. So one of the questions is, what exactly would this do to landmark properties? So first of all, it would preempt and override any and all future landmark designations to allow the types of developments that the bill outlines to be built. Hold on. The Assembly version of the bill, now there's two different versions, the Assembly and the Senate bill. The Assembly version of the bill would actually do the same for all existing landmarks as well as all future landmarks. The Senate bill has some different language in that regard. The Senate version of the bill has added some language after significant pushback from us and a broad array of other concerned entities that the sponsors claim would exempt existing landmarks from the bill's provisions, but this language is murky at best, and it is contradicted by other language found throughout the bill. We've offered alternate language or including a letter in the bill jacket from the sponsors that would clarify the intention so that if the Senate sponsors are saying, look, it's not our intention for the bill to change existing landmark regulations at all, only to preempt future ones, which we're not happy about either, but at least if it only applies to future ones, it's less bad. But they've refused to make either of these changes to address it. So I want to talk a little bit about what future landmarks are that could be affected by the bill. We all know about the literally hundreds of currently landmarked religious properties in our city, which it's debatable whether or not the bill in its final form would affect them. But in terms of future landmarks, these are disproportionately sites that reflect underrepresented histories and groups, such as Black or African American histories, immigrant, Hispanic, Asian American, women, LGBTQ, et cetera. And that's because those are, right now, preservation efforts are focused, if not by no means exclusively, but a lot of the focus is on these underrepresented histories, which the prior generation or more of preservation efforts and designations by city and state agencies have not really reflected or protected. So here's an example. This is Our Lady of Guadalupe Church, which is the first Spanish language church in New York. It's been closed, it's threatened. We are fighting to get this building landmarked. So this is, we hope, a future landmark, which, if the bill is passed, those landmark protections would be preempted, and the site would be able to be developed and potentially destroyed in ways that the otherwise would not be allowed. This is another example of a church that there has been an effort to get landmarked, St. Benedict the Moor, which was the first Black Catholic church north of the Mason-Dixon line. If you see the two buildings just to the right of it, this is located in Hell's Kitchen. Those buildings reflect basically the scale that the existing zoning allows for new development in the area. This is just down the block on the avenue, roughly 800 feet from where St. Benedict the Moor is located. These are 500 or 600 foot tall buildings, which the bill would enable that scale of development on this site. And just to put that in context, I've superimposed an image of the church roughly in scale to these buildings that are just at the avenue end of the block across the avenue, to give you a sense of how disproportionately out of scale, and I think George showed this perhaps even more precisely, but how out of scale the development is that this bill would, in many cases, allow. So then the question is, what do you have to do to qualify for the bill's override of local zoning and landmark regulations? The site must be owned by a religious entity, and the development must be primarily housing and include some quote unquote affordable housing. But only 65% of the bill is required, only 65% of the building rather that would be built is required to actually be housing. 35% can be a community facility, which includes, for example, private university facilities like dorms or for-profit medical facilities. We see a lot of those in our neighborhoods. This means that the buildings can include as little as 13% quote unquote affordable housing in order to qualify for the bill's provisions. So then the question is, for that amount of affordable housing, how affordable is affordable? The units can have income requirements of up to 100% of area median income. Now, not all of them can be 100%, but some of them can be as high as 100% of area median income. Now, that is 50% higher than the New York City median income. In other words, by far, most New Yorkers would not qualify for this quote unquote affordable housing. They would be too poor for it. And it's nearly double the median income for New York City renter households. Therefore, only a very small fraction of New York City renter households would even qualify for this affordable housing. The area median income is higher than the median income in all but 9 of the city's 59 community boards. And that's because area median income does not mean New York City median income. It means New York City plus several much wealthier suburban counties. Another version of how such a development might look is all of the affordable units can require 80% of AMI or area median income for the residents. Now, 80% of AMI is still 25% higher than New York City median income. So therefore, again, most New Yorkers would still not qualify for this quote unquote affordable housing. And it's 56% higher than median income for New York City renters. Therefore, by far, most New York City renters would not qualify. 80% of AMI is still higher than the median income for 45 of the city's 59 community boards. So again, by far most of New York City, this is not affordable to them. And in all cases, 70 to 80% of the housing is not required to have any income or cost restrictions whatsoever, and the prices can be as high as the developer chooses. In many parts of the city, the affordable apartments will be unaffordable too and have income requirements too high for the current average residents. In some parts of the city, the affordable apartments will actually be more expensive than the market rate ones and require higher incomes. We've seen this dynamic many times. Thus, the developments will often be vehicles for gentrification. And even in the more affluent parts of the city, the affordability requirements are fairly modest, requiring a relatively small portion of the building be set aside for units, which may be cheaper than market rate, but may still require above average incomes for New York City. So what if a city or locality wants to require greater or deeper affordability from these developments than this sort of floor that the legislation provides? The bill actually prohibits any locality from imposing any greater affordability requirements on these developments. So what the bill allows is what you will get. A city cannot say, well, that's great that the state is setting this standard. We want to set a higher standard in terms of the level of affordability that can be required. They will not allow that. And that's sort of my basic rundown of what the bill would do.
Great. Thank you so much for this thorough exploration, Andrew. And then turning it to Jay DiLorenzo. Jay, go ahead.
Thanks, Leila, and thanks for your comments, Xiomara and George and Andrew. I want to look at this a little bit, zoom out a little bit, and look at this from a little bit of a broader perspective, and from the preservation perspective. And I want to start just by saying that I think that well-meaning people are looking for solutions to what is a very pressing housing crisis, not just in New York City, but New York State and the nation. The issue that we have is that we don't believe that one of those solutions is to portray historic preservation as a hindrance to the development of housing. In fact, throughout New York State, communities have used preservation, specifically historic rehabilitation tax credits, to create and to preserve housing, including affordable housing. And I think it's important for everyone to hear that. It's almost like it's set up as an adversarial situation. And in fact, our experience in New York State has not been that at all. Between about 2010, 2022 or so, the New York State Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit, which we can talk about later, was responsible for the creation of over 30,000 housing units, more than half of which were low and moderate income units. So I don't accept the this portrayal of preservation being contrary to affordable housing. And as I said, I think it's important for people to hear that. And I want to share my screen and just show a couple of quick slides that I think illustrate some of this. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
I just wanted to show you some examples from around the state. Started in Rochester. This is Canal Commons. This was an award winner from the Preservation League of New York State, done by Providence Housing. It was a long, vacant warehouse. It used to be a warehouse for a shoe company, located right in the Susan B. Anthony Historic District. So this was there's all different kinds of properties in this historic district, this abandoned warehouse being one of them. It was turned into 123 affordable and assisted units. Most units here are reserved for those experiencing chronic homelessness or those in recovery or with mental and health disorders. And both low income and historic tax credits were used to make this project happen. In Albany, Steamboat Square revitalization, another league award winner. The Albany Housing Authority took this former public housing high-rise, created affordable workforce housing, 88 units. It's got an all-electric design with geothermal, HVAC. 14 of those units are dedicated to individuals with serious mental illness. And again, low income and historic tax credits. The housing and the preservation tax credits working together. This is St. Bernard's Park. This is a former seminary in Rochester. Steve Emanuel did this, listed on the National Register of Historic Places, created 160 units of senior housing, low income again, and historic tax credits were used. Moyer Carriage Lofts, another league award winner. This is in Syracuse, former car factory. It's the building with the house on top. Affordable housing, 128 units. It's the largest affordable housing project in Syracuse. Low income and historic tax credits were used. And finally, in Newburgh, this is Newburgh East, East End Part 2. This was done by Rupco. This was 24 sites, a scattered site development. It was in a 7-block radius. It was located in New York's second largest historic district. 10 rehab buildings, but also new construction on 12 vacant lots. It was 61 mixed income homes, 10 units for formerly unhoused persons, and they used the church in the background, the United Methodist Church, to become a community space and a job training space for young people, again, using low income and historic tax credits. So I guess my point here is these projects were possible because of historic preservation. They were possible because they used historic tax credits, and they're reusing what we already have. They're reusing existing buildings. They're not tearing them down and sending them to the landfill. They're creating unique and interesting housing opportunities, places where people want to be, in community centers close to services. And they were able to use historic tax credits because they were listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And as such, these projects needed to be reviewed by the New York State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO. That's part of the deal when you use rehab tax credits, right? And one of the benefits for being listed on the National Register and State Register. And this review has really proved essential in protecting our community landmarks, while at the same time enabling the production of thousands of units of housing in landmarked buildings. Indeed, many communities around New York State have no local landmark protection. They're not like the city where you have a local landmark ordinance. Some communities do, but many do not. And as such, this state SHPO review is the only means of protecting these resources. And SHPO also has compliance responsibilities, both under federal and state law, to review all projects that utilize state or federal funding or need state or federal permitting or licensing to make sure that they avoid or they mitigate any adverse impacts to listed or eligible properties, and to fully explore all feasible and prudent alternatives if the resource at site itself is threatened. And the reason why I say this in this context is that the Cunningham-Gonardus bill could be interpreted to override the state and federally mandated review for this narrow slice of projects. And we think that would set a really bad precedent. We'd like to see it clearly call out in the bill that all projects will continue to be subject to this type of review under sections 1409 and 106 of the state and federal historic preservation acts. And to us, I think when we look at it, this legislation is just too ambiguous. And I think Andrew made this case as well. There has been efforts to make it a little clearer, but we still think that it's too ambiguous and could set a really bad precedent. And as Andrew mentioned, we think it'd be a big mistake to remove protections for religious properties landmarked after the proposed effective date of this legislation. We clearly support innovative use of religious properties for housing, for community centers, of course, religious uses, but historic preservation has played a key role in these projects in the past, and we strongly feel that it needs to continue to do that into the future. So we would like to see some changes, certainly, in this legislation.
Great. Thank you so much, Jay. And as we start our conversation, I want to really encourage all the participants, all the attendees. You are many, 80 of you are with us tonight. We're really grateful for that. Type your questions in the Q&A box if you have any questions, any thoughts, or any ideas that you have about the bill, and we may have the opportunity to clarify that is going to be very helpful. So go ahead and type your questions. We will start this moderated section, and then we will turn to those questions that you are typing in the Q&A function. I want to start with you, Xiomara. In your opinion, how many units of housing this bill would create in New York State? Maybe in the course of I don't know, like 5 years. What is the realistic number that is ascribed to housing production?
I don't have the answer to that. I have not done an analysis, but I do think the Furman Center has done a report looking at this question.
Great. Maybe, and Andrew, do you have a sense of the potential housing production that the bill would create, or aims to create?
I haven't seen anything connected to the bill that offers those projections. I will say a concern in general that we have is that the bill doesn't really come with any sort of analysis of these are the likely outcomes. This is where you might see development and what it would look like. And, I understand that it's hard to, kind of game all of that out, but this has tremendously broad implications in terms of its applicability and where and how it could be used. And I think some more information about what the real world implications are of it are really called for.
Yeah, and that leads me to the next question that I'm gonna throw your way, Andrew. It seems that there has been a lot of pushback. I mean, it doesn't seem, there has been a lot of pushback on the bill. Last year there was grave consternation, especially on the landmark aspects. The bill was reintroduced this year. Has there been any attempt to actually improve the language of the bill? I think that you have done some of that, Andrew. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I wish I could say there's been a more productive pipeline of conversation and more progress in that regard, because, certainly, as Jay said, we all believe that the issue of affordability and the lack of affordable housing in our city and our state is an enormously pressing problem. And we also, I think, probably all agree that there are a lot of financially distressed religious institutions that we would like to see helped. We have tried very hard to reach out to the bill's main sponsors, as well as some of the organizations that are behind it, and just have a constructive conversation about how can we meet each of our goals. I'll just say it hasn't gotten very far. The additional language that the Senate bill added last year, which was not done in any particular consultation with the groups that raised the issue, has been portrayed as basically answering all of our questions and all of our problems with the bill. It does not. While it may be a small step in the right direction, as I mentioned, it leaves a lot of really important points very ambiguous and doesn't address any of the many other ones that we've raised. So I wish there was more of a dialogue going on with the bill sponsors.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jay, in your experience, as someone who deals with historic properties, lots of them are owned by religious institutions. We have heard time and again that lots of these institutions are actually going through difficult financial times, and is that something that requires special attention? Are you seeing at the state level a number of these facilities that are owned by religious institutions that are actually not being operated simply because the cost is too high? And is there some validity in maybe the concept of the bill, but maybe the execution is not adequate?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do see this. We do see struggling congregations around the state. We see dwindling congregations. Everyone knows this, but the situations are all different. Some of them are closely held property that aren't available for any sort of reuse or any sort of alternative uses. Some of them wouldn't be suitable for housing. And at the same time, some of them have been reused with a smaller worship space, and the other space utilized for housing, or for other types of community services, or as I showed in Newburgh, the Methodist Church there being used as a community center. So I think they're all different, and I'm not sure necessarily that this bill kind of gets to the root of the problem. And we would just prefer to approach it more with working hand in hand with historic preservation to find solutions than just saying, oh, preservation, that's a problem. Let's kind of move that aside so that we can do this greater good, which we don't think is going to be effective long term.
Yeah, and turning the next question to you, George. We were already, feeling trepidations with City of Yes because we felt that, the stroke was just too broad. Now we're dealing with a state bill. Doesn't get broader than that. And obviously it's going to have vastly different consequences in a very low density rural environment where maybe a congregation has a big plot of land that they want to use for development of affordable housing. But in New York City, the typology is vastly different. So my first question is, currently, a religious institution that owns land in New York City, are they restricted from developing this land beyond any underlying zoning?
Well, no, in New York, well, unless of course they are in manufacturing district, but
But that would apply
yeah,
to any lot. I mean,
yeah.
there's
I mean,
specific.
right. New
Yeah.
York City has, it doesn't. It permits housing basically everywhere except for M zones, right? And so yes, religious institutions can develop their properties as of right. That's not always true elsewhere, right? Where you have different zoning laws in the towns. Leila, let me say this: is that when I heard Xiomara talking about their struggles in the Hudson River Valley, it was extraordinarily sympathetic, right? You have lots of these little jurisdictions with antiquated zoning laws and comprehensive plans that they struggle to update, and some of them struggle with the difficulty of change, and others are simply struggling with, like, hey, they would like to change, but they don't have the resources to update their comp plan and update their zoning and then do a kind of engagement with, to get a plan and zoning that everybody can get behind. And it just, it seems to me that there's a real opportunity, because there is, I think, working in a lot of these places, there is a lot of desire to see affordable housing, to see more housing, to see more not only mixed income but mixed use housing in a lot of these communities. But they are struggling with the difficulty of updating their plans and zoning. And I could see the state getting behind an effort to provide grants to communities that want to update their zoning and comprehensive plan. They used to do stuff like this, right? So they used to have this grant program for local waterfront development plans, right? And they could do something like that to help communities develop their plans to facilitate the development of more housing. And there are ways of doing it to still plan, still do environmental review, and also try to get more housing and more affordable housing.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because the bill makes a distinction between the areas outside of New York City
Yes.
and New York City, but because they do recognize that in order to cross-subsidize affordable housing, the areas that are not in New York City may actually not have the financial capacity to actually do that. So my question back to you, Saramara, are we actually targeting the wrong problem? Is it actually a funding and financing issue rather than a zoning issue that is hindering the production of affordable housing?
No, I don't think so. There is not enough government resources to throw money at this problem and try to produce the amount of affordable housing that's necessary. I think you do need both a market approach for supply as well as a subsidized approach. Now, as a nonprofit developer, we are often building 100% affordable for really low-income households and supportive housing. But this would allow folks to do mixed income housing. And I just want to to your point about outside of New York City, the bill currently sets aside 20% of the floor area for 80% of AMI, or average of 80% of AMI. So that can be between, units at 40, 50, 60, all the way up to 100, but the average is 80% AMI. And I think it's at 80% AMI because there's regions outside of New York City, where the market rate for those unrestricted units are not high enough to cover and cross-subsidize really deeply affordable units, right? And so they're trying to strike a balance here so that it works for development. Otherwise, you pass the legislation and then nothing gets built and actually doesn't do what it's intended.
So
So I did want
speak
to.
a little bit to how you're able to build, and by that I mean, how are you able to finance a 100% affordable building? What are the funding and financing tools that are in your toolbox?
Yeah, I think we are fortunate that we live in New York because the state and the city are both putting resources behind affordable housing at levels we have not seen before, but it's still not enough.
But speak like, is it the historic tax credit? Is it the low income tax credit?
Yeah, so it's a low income
what are the
housing.
tools?
Yeah, there's state subsidy through the through HCR, and then we also have a low-income housing tax credit and a state low-income housing tax credit. But those are both those are competitive processes, right? Unless you have a huge building where you can get as of right low-income housing tax credits, the 9% tax credit award RFQ comes out once a year, every year, and there's lots of projects clamoring for that resource. And a lot of projects don't get awarded the first year they apply. They end up applying maybe 3, 4 times, 5 times, and then they get awarded. And so there's a real lag between the resources that are available and the amount of housing that we want to build to meet the demand for affordable housing.
So it looks like, although I hear you that, that there is also a zoning component, but it looks like the bottleneck is also with access to funding and financing.
Yeah, but as I mentioned in some of my examples, right, there are projects we couldn't even get off the ground because of zoning constraints, because of, community planning boards that are against affordable housing, as George mentioned, right? And outdated codes that I don't think sometimes they have the capacity to update or don't want to update. Things like, there's a project we're working on in Rockland County where, they're limiting the number of 1 and 2 bed. They want to have more ones and studios in a multifamily development. They don't want 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms. And it's near a train stop. And there's a good amenities there in school. It's a good school district, right? And they also want a hell of a lot more parking that is necessary. And so you end up having to build this really ugly, awkward building in a sea of parking lots. And that's not really what we want to build, right? We want to build something that's more transformative and helpful for families to take advantage of being in that neighborhood.
So it's interesting because, this in New York, we actually are pushing for the exact opposite. Developers love to build studios and 1 bedrooms, and it is really, really hard to get them to build for families. And so in a way, the bill, by deregulating, may actually permit what you are seeking in parts of the state, while at the same time hindering that much more what is considered as good policy in New York City, which is the creation of those larger family units. Andrew, I saw that you had your hand up. Go ahead. We always love your comments.
The general comment I would make is, I just think that the bill is an incredibly broad and blunt tool that has some very, very far-reaching potential implications. I have no doubt that there are localities, particular locations or institutions where some good could come from what this bill would enable. But it's also very, very clear that in a lot of cases, some very bad outcomes would come from what this bill would enable, and those are really being ignored by the authors of the legislation. And not to sort of sidetrack things, but we recently did a report about how things have been going with the Soho NoHo rezoning, and it pointed out that all of the sort of worst case scenarios, the exploiting of loopholes, the avoiding of the supposed good intentions of the rezoning for the most profitable outcomes. We had warned that that was what would happen. And so far, that is exactly what is happening. And I think we need to take a critical look at the bill in terms of tightening up in a lot of ways some of its allowances, as well as eliminating some of the unnecessary overrides. As Jay pointed out, there's really no reason why developing affordable housing and having a building subject to landmark designation that is historic and worthy of landmark designation are incompatible, but the bill treats them as incompatible.
Yeah, no, very true. So I am looking at the Q&A box, and I want to acknowledge that we're joined by our City Club of New York colleague, John Lobier, who is the chair of our law committee. And he has a number of really insightful questions. I'm going to read one of them. So he writes, at least as the law used to be, it would be inconsistent with the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, in that it gives an advantage to religious property developers over secular. I don't know if anyone wants to take a crack at that. Is it actually okay to single out in a positive fashion religious institutions where, other non-for-profits, let's say, a large hospital that has, grounds that they would like to develop, or maybe a school would not be covered by this law. I don't know, Xiomara, I don't know if you want to take a crack at that, or Jay.
Sure, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't get in the specifics legally, but I do know that, obviously legal teams have looked at this bill and reviewed it. And we know that policies like it have passed in other places, other jurisdictions, right? In California and other localities. And so to the extent that there's precedent, I think that's interesting.
Great.
I would just say that I think it would warrant, I think you could make a legitimate challenge to this. Because it's singling out and giving advantages to a specific class of property owner. And we would rather see more broad-based incentives to do this kind of work. And that's what we've been trying to do. I mean, building off what Xiomara said about incentives and about funding, particularly from housing and community renewal. Well, housing and community renewal has a limited pool of grant funds. And so one of the things that we did this past year at the League is work with our partners in the affordable housing community, work with the New York State Affordable Housing Association to make changes and improvements to the New York State Historic Rehab Tax Credit, so that the credit would be worth more if you were doing affordable housing projects. So it would decrease the need for direct grant subsidies from HCR, which could go to other projects. So it would increase that pool of funds. Right prior to this legislation, all projects that wanted to use the income producing New York State Historic Rehab Tax Credit had to be in a distressed census tract. And what this new language in this new law does is say, if you're building affordable housing, you don't need to be in a distressed census tract. And if you're otherwise eligible for the historic rehab tax credit, you can take that credit. And so that opens up broad areas of the state that, because of their higher census tract qualifications, weren't able to use historic rehab tax credits. And now they've got a very powerful tool, 20% tax credit. And if you're a project with $2.5 million or less in qualified rehab costs, it's a 30% tax credit. And that's a very powerful tool. And again, something that we worked with the affordable housing community to do. These are not ideas that we can't hold in our head at the same time. And I will also say that there's important changes to the federal historic rehab tax credit that we're advocating for that would be very similar to this. It would make the historic tax credit easier for affordable housing projects to use, it would make it more likely that they would be used for office rehab, and it would make it more easily used by not-for-profits, particularly those that were doing affordable housing. So there's another way to get at this issue without saying we need to do away with historic preservation and with landmark oversight.
Yeah, great. And I want to acknowledge that the acting director of Municipal Art Society, our friend Carrie Butler, is with us tonight. Thank you, Carrie. And she types, I read that 60,000 units is the estimate of number of dwelling units that the bill would produce, but probably will take more than 5 years to get there. Thank you for this little data point and insight. Actually, I see that Xiomara, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Jay, because I applaud your work within the state to enable affordable housing to use the historic tax credit, and it is a great tool for affordable housing. So I don't think, as an affordable housing developer, I'm not against, landmark per se. And I think it's just to clarify, you can have a landmark building and not be on the National Register, right? And so if you're not on that National Register, you can't take advantage of that tax credit, but you still have multiple layers of review or additional layers of review for the LPC designation. But I think the reason it's written into the bill is because there's maybe a fear that preservation and landmarking is going to be weaponized to prevent development, because in many of these jurisdictions, people will do that. They're trying to prevent development as any way that they can. I think in California, they did a study, and I think like over half of the developments that used SECRA, or the environmental review, were challenged by organizations that were set up just to block development. And so I do think there's a real push and pull, and there's a tension there where these tools are being weaponized or are being used really just to stop development, and not just because you want to preserve something that's of historical significance.
It's actually interesting. I think that in New York City we certainly experience this this tension, but what we see on the other end of the spectrum is actually, once you upzone a site, a lot, or an entire district, the direct effect is actually to increase the value of the land and to actually stimulate demolition, so that you can really take full advantage of the density. And I think that, George, the massing that you showed is very, very striking, where if you let the market be the driver, which this bill would do that. This bill would not mandate a certain typology, would not mandate that any development happens. It would be really driven by the market. The market would actually demand that the building be demolished, and any lender would actually want that and demand that, and that would be a failure of the developer not to, because it would not maximize the use of the land. Can you speak a little bit to that, George? The sort of incentive for demolition when we see these broad opportunities for upzoning.
Yeah, I mean, sure. You do have these often obsolete buildings that are very difficult to be reused for anything other than their religious purpose. And they take up a lot of space on a lot, right? And so that makes it difficult to reuse. Now, the one that we showed was actually built on the vacant lot. and preserved the church. It demolished the rectory, but preserved the church and partial school building. You might also see that. I mean, in tower districts, you can move floor area from the low building to the high building. And we've seen some of that on Park Avenue. So it's really site specific. I wouldn't paint it with a very broad brush that way, because sometimes it also depends on the institution, right? The institution sometimes is still using the building, right? And wants to continue to use the building. In other cases, it's gone and long gone. And I think it's going to vary a lot. And I think that's maybe, you know, I'm a planning advocate among everything else, right? And I think that if you approach these exercise or these sites, these opportunities, and plan them well, you could have something that works for everybody. But I worry just, the broad brush that is painted with the 800 feet. You can move any zoning district 800 feet from this site. Well, that's not planning at all, right? That's geography. And we're treating New York City, and this only applies in New York City. It just doesn't make sense to me. That particular clause makes no sense at all, and it creates an enormous uncertainty and unpredictability in the built form in Manhattan. And being an urban planner in New York City, I should say built form in New York City, and being an urban planner in New York City, the thing that I always think is, don't break it, right? Whatever you do, don't break it, because it's this amazing place, and this actually has the potential to break it, and it concerns me. And the upstate provisions are so different than the New York City provisions, and I don't understand the reason for that. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Thanks. Andrew.
Yeah, I wanted to both dovetail that and address the issue that came up before, which is this sort of myth of that, there's going to be these preemptive landmark designations to prevent the bill from having any efficacy. And so therefore, it's critical that the bill include these elements that don't allow future landmark designations to have full effect. We've had extensive conversations with the bill sponsors about this, and I wish I could say that they were listening to sort of rationale or reason a little bit more. I can't speak to what, small hamlets in California or even elsewhere in New York State might be able to do in terms of the way their land use regulations work. What I can speak to is New York City, and the bill does have separate provisions for New York City and for the rest of New York State in several areas. And it's very clear that that is not a realistic possibility in New York City for two reasons. One is there's nobody that has the unilateral ability to landmark in New York City. The Landmarks Preservation Commission does the designation, and then it is subject to review by the city council, which can overturn it and which has overturned designations in the past when they've thought they've been inappropriate. Secondly, landmark designation is a very long, drawn-out process, whereas getting a permit from the Department of Buildings, by comparison, is a very quick one. So if there is a religious institution that says, we want to build one of these things under the Faith-Based Affordable Housing Act, and we're worried that somebody's going to sneak up on us and get us landmarked, and then we won't be able to do it, all they have to do is get a Department of Buildings permit, and that valid Department of Buildings permit cannot be preempted by landmark designations. So it's really, again, it's a throw the baby out with the bathwater approach, which I'm not sure if that's the real reason for it being in there or not, but there is no reason to have this preemptive clause within the bill that prevents any future landmark designations from having full efficacy.
Thank you. So we have quite a few questions in the Q&A box, including a question about the underlying effect of gentrification. A lot of concern is that once you start upzoning, we have seen it in New York City, pretty obviously, and in Manhattan, but also in Brooklyn and Queens. Staten Island is actually following suit. I don't know who wants to take this question. Maybe Xiomara, is it something that is of concern that as much as you are creating affordable housing because of the AMI calculation, which Andrew took us through, the AMI in New York City is based on the median income in New York City, Nassau, Westchester, and Rockland County, which is much higher than specific parts of New York City, certainly much higher than the median income in Queens or in the Bronx or in Staten Island. So are we taking the risk, as we are trying to create affordable housing, to actually fail on that?
So just to kind of go over the AMI options in the bill for New York City, it's 25% at 60% of AMI with a minimum of 5% affordable at 40% of AMI. There's a 30% and 80% AMI option, and then a 20% at 40% AMI option. So it sort of mimics the mandatory inclusionary housing provision. And I just know from wearing my old HPD hat that there was a lot of analysis going into creating those options and taking into consideration the different markets throughout New York City, right? Manhattan is going to be very different from some of the outer boroughs and parts of Brooklyn. So I do think it helps create affordable housing within the market without needing, specific agency, subsidy, government intervention. And I think that's what we need. It also helps create affordable housing in neighborhoods that are high income, affluent communities that have faith-based institutions in them, where otherwise you might not have that opportunity to create affordable housing. And you get more bonuses if you're doing an 100% affordable project. So for a nonprofit, affordable housing developer, that's really great because we get to really get deep affordability and hit and serve more families. So I don't think it's spurring gentrification. I think we've had City of Yes. We have all of these other sort of zoning incentives that are already out there, and this is just another sort of tool in the toolbox.
So, I was reminded a couple of weeks ago that speaking percentage is actually at times a little difficult to grasp. So I just want to state, what it means in absolute numbers. So 40% of the AMI in New York City is 46,800. And 60% of the AMI is 70,200. So it is basically the salary of a teacher. And in a project where, let's say, you would build 20 units, it means that 4 of those units would be set aside for folks who make that income. Actually, not even, because blended we would be, I guess, yeah. So some projects would be at 60%, while those that have units at 40%, meaning that someone who has an income of 46,800, that would be blended with other units that would be more expensive. So I think that that this is a conversation that certainly in New York City has been very pressing on the metrics and the calculation of the AMI, which is set by the federal government. So it's a complicated affair.
The AMI percentages are set, but the AMI is set by the government, but the choice of which percentages of that AMI to use is set by, in New York City, the city, and in this bill by the authors of this bill. Let me just say the bill basically for New York City is saying we're going to apply MIH even more broadly than we already have. So if you think MIH is a good thing, you'd probably be more positively inclined towards this bill. If you think MIH has not been such a great thing, you might be more skeptical of the bill. I'm definitely in the latter camp, and there's no denying that in broad swaths of New York City, even the affordable components of these developments are too expensive for most people. And sometimes they're so expensive that they're more expensive than the market rate units in those same buildings. So I think we really have to consider how much of an actual public benefit is there here for what we're giving up in return for it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I see that we have some questions about the fiscal implications, and specifically whether these buildings would actually be subject to real estate tax as they are on religious property. The bill is actually very explicit and states that yes, the buildings, if their main purpose is housing, the buildings would be subject to property taxes, so they would not be tax exempt. We also had a question about some potential loopholes where a religious institution may team up with a developer to actually purchase land to actually fall under the provisions of this bill. Once again, the bill is explicit that the land has to be owned 100% by the religious institution, which is not to say that, the religious institution may not be incentivized to purchase land to then enter into a long-term lease. So I think that, the loopholes are, an unavoidable thing. It's good to see them before, the bill is passed, if it, if it proceeds. Andrew.
Well, the bill is actually even more specific than that in a good way. I'll give it credit where credit's due. It says that it has to be 100% owned by the religious institution at the time that the bill is passed. So you can't sort of, after the bill is passed, scheme with a developer to purchase a property to have this apply to it. It has to currently be religiously owned, which is a good thing.
Okay, so they had thought about those loopholes, which is good. We are almost at the 8 p.m. mark, and I see that there are many more questions, and I'm really grateful for this level of engagement. But as we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about how we see the future of the bill. The legislature is still in session. Does the bill have a chance to actually be brought to the floor? Is there any hope to improve the bill? Are we going to discuss it in 2026? Maybe starting with you, Jay. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so it's still a bill. There's a bill in the Assembly, there's a bill in the Senate. They are both in committee. I think it's in the local government committee in the Assembly, and probably the Housing and Development Committee in the Senate. If you are represented by members that sit on those committees, if you want to have your voice heard, I would suggest direct outreach to those committee members. Committees are in the process of amending those bills and getting them ready to move on to the next step in the process. These bills have a lot of sponsors. There are a number of legislators that support this bill. And I think it's important, if you have questions, thoughts, pros or cons, you should reach out to your legislators and have your voice heard. It is possible that it could reach the floor for a vote, but it all depends on what they hear from their constituents.
Thank you. Xiomara, what are your thoughts on the future of the bill?
Well, I hope it passes. Obviously, I'm very supportive of the bill. I would implore folks to think about compromises. If to use the same analogy, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think this could be incredibly impactful, especially in the suburbs and outside of New York City, where I see a lot of pushback on housing that people really need and depend on. And so I'm also very excited that this bill would allow us to tap into religious, owned property that are located in areas that are of high opportunity where we don't get to build affordable housing nearly ever. And so I think for that reason, those reasons, I'm really supportive. And I think there's ways to maybe mitigate some of the concerns that have been brought up today.
Thank you. George, any thoughts on the future of the bill?
You know, I'm not a political person, so I can't speak to anything there, but you know, you normally develop policy to address issues. I think, as Yomar said, and I can attest, is that there's a difference between New York City and the suburbs. And there is, and so it would make sense to do something like this that affects places where there is a problem, where there's a bigger problem. And you know, in New York City, there's been massive changes to local zoning to address this issue, and much more in the pipeline. So I'm not sure why you need state intervention in a place like New York City.
Thank you. Andrew.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, we have also approached this as, let's see if we can find common ground. You know, we've offered a lot of solutions and potential compromises. I wish I could say that there'd been more progress on them up to this point. You know, it's not over yet. We hope there will be. I do think that there are legitimate issues here in terms of both affordability and helping financially strapped religious institutions and ways of doing it. But I do think there are some very, very serious issues with the bill as currently structured. And the thing that we've both been saying to state legislators and urging people to say to state legislators is you need to address these issues or drop your support for the bill. We would love a win-win that satisfies everybody.
Great. Thank you so much. We are almost at the 8 p.m. mark. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you to our panelists, Andrew Berman, Jay DiLorenzo, Xiomara Pedraza, and George Janes. The City Club of New York is always really happy to, you know, foster dialogue and, you know, bring different viewpoints so that we can, you know, hopefully help, you know, foster this dialogue with legislators, recognizing that, you know, the bill has some merits, but also needs some improvements. So really grateful for this great conversation. The City Club of New York is a non-for-profit organization. We rely entirely on contributions by our audience. And if you like what you see, please consider making a contribution. They are fully tax deductible. Stay tuned. We have some more webinars in the pipelines for the rest of the month of June before we break for summer, including on affordable housing, public housing, as well as the use of public land. We're going to keep you busy. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and see you very soon. Good night.